Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today our analyst will be diving into the top 10 items to look out for in patch 10.8. We'll be exploring the new items popping up in the meta as well as the already valuable items of the previous meta. As always, this is not listed in order of strength as each item is strong dependent on the right circumstances. With that said, let's get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. All right, let's get back to the video, and to start off the list, we have Guardian Angel coming in at number 10. Good old reliable Guardian Angel remains one of the standout items of the meta as the revive effect of the item almost always gets value. It's playable in virtually every composition and can be given to a plethora of different champions. So far in each meta of set 3, this item has been a pivotal pickup and likely won't change in 10.8. Look to play Guardian Angel on high value champions, which fall under two main categories. The first is meant for hypercarry units that you want to avoid being instantly killed off in a fight. Some examples of this are Kale, Jhin, and Aurelia. Second category is for champions with ultimates that are either channeled or important to get off at least once. Examples of this are Nico, Cho'Gath, and Echo. Basically any champion with a valuable ultimate that either does a good amount of damage or has CC. Next up, let's continue the theme of items made with a sword by talking about the number 9 pick, Infinity Edge. Infinity Edge has been a staple item for several champions throughout set 3, and with a lot of those champions still being played in 10.8, it's likely to keep being valuable. While it does contest with Guardian Angel as they both require a sword, it's a necessity for a few champions that are still going to be prominent in the meta. Generally, it will take priority behind Guardian Angel, but it's completely fine to make this item early on if you have the components for it. The core champions to give Infinity Edge are Aurelia, Shaco, and Jhin. The Super Mech can also utilize this item, though it's likely the swords will go on other champions in the composition using Mech Pilot. By far, Aurelia is one of the best champions to give this, whether it's to make her the primary carry in cybernetics or a secondary carry in Kale builds, as it helps her kill targets quickly to get the reset effect off of her ultimate. Overall, any physical damage carry will use this item well, but the three mentioned are definitely the best to give Infinity Edge to. It's time to talk about the new item making a splash in the meta, coming in at number 8 on the list, Chalice of Favor. Chalice was considered a bit on the weaker side after it was introduced in set 3, but it received a key buff in the new patch. The buff made it so that the holder of the item also gained mana when casting. While it doesn't sound like too big of a deal, it does make it so certain champions can cast way more often with the additional mana gained from having Chalice. This is especially powerful in the Star Guardian Sorcerer composition that is doing extremely well in the current meta. This is because the Star Guardians give mana to the others when casting a spell, so it means a low mana pool champion like Syndra can be almost like a mana battery for the team by casting her ultimate frequently. Seraph's is definitely similar in design and still a key item for low mana pool champions, but Chalice does a similar effect while requiring only one tier, making it easier overall to consistently make each game. We definitely recommend you try this item out, especially if you have any plans to run a Star Guardian composition. Moving on to number 7 on the list, we have one of the most consistent items throughout the history of TFT, Zephyr. We likely don't need to spend a lot of time talking about this item as it's been one of the best utility items in every single meta. It's generally not prioritized over other items, but you can never go wrong with building at least one Zephyr each game. Multiple Zephyrs will reduce the amount of items you have for carries, but since on average you get enough components to make 5 or 6 completed items in a game, you can almost always spare 2 to make a Zephyr. There really isn't any specific time to make this item, though it does get the most value in the mid and late game when positioning is incredibly important. With the changes to damage in 10.8, it can also be used as a tool to punish any greedy players that are playing weaker boards for a better economy, since taking one champion out of the fight for 5 seconds is a huge deal early on in the game. Overall, this is one of the few items that is almost always worth making every single game. Let's move on to the number 6 item on the list, Bramble Vest. Bramble Vest has certainly lost a bit of its value compared to how dominant it was at the end of set 2, but it's insanely valuable to make, especially early game. There are definitely other items on this list worth prioritizing over Bramble Vest, but if you do need a good default item to make with early items, this is one that is always a worthwhile consideration. Not only does it give a good amount of armor, it also negates the extra damage from critical strikes, meaning it helps a ton throughout the game in mitigating damage to a hard to kill champion. Generally, this will go on a frontliner or a unit that you want to survive a long time, such as the Super Mech. All in all, Bramble Vest is likely always going to get some amount of value when you make it, and that's why it's a top tier item. Next up, we have the only spatula based item on the top 10 list. Demolitionist Charge comes in at number 5. Items made from a spatula tend to be harder to recommend to be made consistently because, well, it's hard to get a spatula. That reason, alongside the fact that spatula items, besides Force of Nature, tend to be rather specific for their uses. Making someone a protector, for example, will generally only matter in a few specific cases. But those downsides to spatula items aside, the Demolitionist charge deserves a spot on the list for an important reason. That reason is Mech Infiltrator. The composition is still proving to be a dominant force in 10.8. Because of that, when you are playing Mech Infiltrator, it becomes really important to try to get a spatula to turn Kaisa into a Demolitionist. When you're able to do that, it makes the composition incredibly difficult to deal with and often can net you a top 3 placement. We can't recommend this item every game, but if you are playing Mech Infiltrator, it's definitely extremely important to get. Next up, we have 2 items that are worth looking out for in 10.8 that may or may not falter depending on how the meta plays out. The first is number 4 on the list, Static Shiv. This item saw a bit of play in patch 10.7 after it was buffed, but the meta didn't necessarily favor it too often outside of cybernetics. But in the new patch, with the pace of the game going up, having an item that does well in the early and mid game like Static Shiv can be quite valuable, especially if the meta shifts and fast attack compositions that spike in the mid game become popular. Look to give this item to anyone that can attack quickly. A few examples include Xayah in the early game, Lucian in the mid game, or Echo later in the game, as his ultimate will proc the extra damage. The Master Yi and Yasuo carry composition that popped off at the end of 10.7 can also do well with this item to help get through the early and into the mid game. Overall, this item may be hit or miss depending on how the meta plays out, but it is a viable option early game to help you win rounds. The second item that may see a little bit more play in the new patch is our number 3 pick, Shroud of Stillness. Shroud was buffed in 10.8 to have the width of his effect hit 1.5 hexes instead of just 1. This isn't a huge increase, but it does make this item a bit more appealing to make. The biggest benefit of playing this item is the utility it provides by slowing down how quickly an enemy champion can cast its ultimate. Having a wider area that it hits means it's easier to get multiple champions in the area it affects while making it harder for enemies to position against it. We'll have to just see how valuable the item ends up being, but it definitely is one to keep an eye out for, especially with a lot of magic heavy compositions doing well in the meta. Speaking of magic heavy compositions, the number 2 item on our list, Ionic Spark, is great for those builds. After being changed in set 3 to reduce the magic resist of nearby champions, Ionic Spark has become a very commonly played item. The viability of Spark does depend on the meta, but 10.8 is shaping up to be quite magic damage heavy, and oh boy does Ionic Spark do well in those compositions. Look to give this to a frontliner and watch your magic damage backline melt away the enemy frontline. One of the best champions to give this item to is Neeko in the Star Guardian Sorcerer build. Because Neeko is one of the only frontline options in that build, it often means quite a few melee champions will be in range of both her ultimate and the magic resist reduction of Ionic Spark. That combination means Neeko can melt enemy front lines almost by herself. Overall, this item is going to get a lot of value in a lot of different builds in the current meta. Alright, it is time for the number 1 item on the list, Zeke's Herald. Zeke's was changed in patch 10.8 to only affect allies within 1 hex of the unit wearing it on the same row. But to make up for that change, the attack speed buff was increased to 30%. This is a huge increase for the item, and despite it affecting 2 less champions than previously, it's overall better. It hasn't been fully figured out yet where this will do best in the meta, but it's definitely going to be played way more often than it was in the previous patches of set 3. The current meta build you can look to play this item in is Kale carry builds or Master Yi and Yasuo carry builds. Outside of those builds, it can honestly be made in almost anything, as attack speed is the best way to speed up a champion gaining mana from auto-attacking. This means it can get value even in a build using sorcerers just to make a few of the champions gain mana faster. Definitely try this item out and experiment with it in different compositions. And that is going to be it for the top 10 items to try out in patch 10.8. But as always, we can't end the video just yet before talking about our honorable mentions. Honorable mentions are a bit specific this time around, as they're both based around the spatula. While we did talk about the Demolitionist charge being a key item to watch out for, the first honorable mention, Darkstar's Heart, is less important to look out for. Darkstar is looking to do quite well in 10.8, and because of that, this item's value goes up, but unlike Demolitionist charge, it's not a necessity for the build it's used in. It's useful to replace weaker champions like Jarvan for a better champion like Lulu, so you can get Celestial and Mystic in earlier for your build. So the value of this item is quite specific, but with Darkstar doing well in the meta, it's worthwhile to consider for the build. Keeping with that theme, the second honorable mention is the Star Guardian's Charm. Much like the Darkstar's Heart, this item is specific to one composition, but isn't exactly necessary, though it certainly helps. The big reason to consider this item when playing Star Guardian Sorcerer is that it opens up getting 6 sorcerers at level 8 by giving it to one of the sorcerers. sorcerers. This is quite the increase in power, but 4 sorcerer already does well enough for the build that you don't often have to go out of your way to make this item. But with how strong Star Guardians are in the current meta, this item gets a good amount of value when you do make it. That is going to be it for today's video, folks. We hope that this top 10 list helps you out with your rank climb in the new patch. Keep in mind that the meta shifts most in the first week of a patch as everyone is exploring new options, so try experimenting to see what works for you. Let us know in the comment section below what items you've been liking the most. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.